this is where I think you're a little bit stuck. And this is where you and I have been at loggerheads here in terms of roster construction. Every time a name gets mentioned, someone like you or someone, lots of other people will be like, that guy can't defend. He's a liability. Fine. I understand that thinking, but also if they can't play offense, that's a problem too. And so you lost because of your offense, not your defense. So now it becomes, what are you looking for? And what are the Celtics looking for in the offseason? And I'm going to use the Derek White example. I thought the concept behind Derek White was flawed. Not that Derek White isn't good, not that Derek White isn't a useful basketball player. I didn't understand them needing a defensive specialist who's a combo guard that neither handles the ball and runs the show, is not a shooter, and also just is more defense on a team that was so desperately starved for shooting. Didn't understand it then. I think they thought they'd get a little more out of him than they did. And since they
For
didn't, since
sure.
since in fact it went in the other direction, you could argue that it was a disaster because I think they were projecting more and they got less and they were like, crap, that's not what I wanted out of this. So my point is, if that's is that the best player they thought they could acquire, or are they married to this Ime philosophy? And is it a shared philosophy with Brad of everyone plays defense, have no weaknesses out there, everything is switchable, and that's what we want to do? And is
Well,
that
that's
what they're
got
going to
them
be?
where they went.
Sure, but it also it can only get you so far. And so the question is that going to be a problem? Like, is that going to be a thing where you're going to remove anybody? You're not even going to consider a small point guard that reminds you of Kemba, because they're going to get hunted defensively, or a Duncan Robinson, who, if you wanted to absorb his contract per se to get a shooter that another team desperately wants to get off their roster, wouldn't even consider it because it's a defensive liability. Are you limiting yourself because you're married to the fact that everybody on the floor has to be able to play within this defensive concept? Are they willing to change everything that got them where they got this year? Because if they don't, you're going to have a lot of the same. You might find people that fit the system, but you could end up with the same exact problems at the end of the year when you just don't have enough relief for Tatum and Brown, or enough shooting on the floor to space it, or enough dynamic playmakers on offense who can initiate offense on their own. That's going to be an issue. So I'm really curious what type of player they're targeting.
I think those are two different conversations, the two you bring up there, because I wouldn't sacrifice what they're doing defensively by trading Smart for a guy who's less of a defender, possibly more upside as an offensive player. I think they just did the opposite of that, and it was the biggest difference between the 21 and 22 teams. So I'm not going to take away defensive pieces from this team in search of offense. Like Rob, I almost look at him going into this offseason and say he's just about untouchable, because I think he's the engine that really drives this defense, the scheme that takes them to the next level and gives them that championship upside. So I'm not looking to move him at all. I do think you have to look at more trade off with Smart, but I'm not going to trade Smart for Jalen Brunson per se, who I think would be a dramatically worse defender in that spot. And I don't think the
He
upside you get
would
from
be,
him
but then it
offensively.
becomes, and again, if this is what I don't understand, is the Golden State Warriors were playing lineups with how many weak defenders? The Golden State Warriors are the second best defense in basketball. Had how many lineups with multiple people on the floor who were not plus defenders? Quite a
Yeah.
few.
Yeah, but they have a system that's kind of on a string
I
anchored by
understand, but that's the
this
point
amazing
is
help
you sh
defender in Green.
you should be able to do that as well, and if you've got, someone like Rob back there to help clean up some of your messes, that's kind of the point. The Celtics defense should be able to hide some defensive liabilities there. You're playing lineups with Curry and Poole out there and not worried about getting killed. Clay, I know, who was once an all-world defender, is certainly not the same thing that he was before. I mean, he's more than capable, but he's not a lockdown guy anymore. But I mean, there were lineups Golden State was playing with guys who were not absolute killer defenders because they recognize the need for offense, and they're your champs. And they're not only your champs, they're your champs with the second-rated defense in the NBA, which would have undoubtedly been the first-rated defense in the NBA if Draymond Green didn't miss half the season. So why can't this work for the Celtics? Why does everybody have to be a plus defender? It
Because
doesn't make sense to me.
'Cause I think they're gonna have a shorter rotation than Golden State does.
They can't
No
have a
way
shorter
around it.
rotation because you can't play Tatum and Brown 40 minutes a game or
But
high
they
30s.
can't get into the upper echelon of the tax like Golden State did. Like, there's just no way you're gonna be able to match that level of depth. Now, you do have to get to, like, 9 or 10 here, I think, but you're pretty limited in how you can get there. I'm not opposed to bringing on Robinson, and this is the second
It's
half
not
of the
even the
question you just
Robinson as
asked
much
there.
as
Yeah.
it's not even Robinson as I'm saying. I use him because one, he fits into the TPE, and two, he's exactly the type of player that is all offense, no defense, that immediately gets dismissed here because the idea is that you have to be able to play defense to play within the system.
But
So
you're
I'm
not giving
wondering,
up any of your defenders for him. So
yeah.
I feel better about that because you could put him out there as one singular defender who you can hide. Because against most teams, Golden State's probably one of the exceptions offensively. You can hide one guy, and the Celtics did that with Pritchard and Neesmith for stretches this year. I think you can get by with four great defenders, especially if Rob's on the floor, sort of in that green role, protecting the back end. Like there's a security blanket there that I think you can get away with one guy, but if you're trading in a central core rotation guy like Smart, who's playing 36 minutes a game, and you're bringing in a Brunson and saying, all right, we're playing this guy 36 minutes a game, that I think changes the fabric of your team. And do you gain enough offensively? Do you gain enough playmaking with a guy like that that it's going to make up for the amount of defense you lose as a team? Because I don't think you're the number one defense anymore at that point if you're playing
You're
a guy like
not,
that
but
for.
that's there is where someone like Derek White all of a sudden becomes something a different story because now
Do
you
you have
do have
confidence in him stepping in?
none, but it doesn't matter. Meaning, I have more confidence in him. Look, I have more confidence in his role on the team if you had someone else there, if you had your offense defense sort of combo, you know. And certainly if you, let's say, replaced Smart with someone like a Brunson, then you would have White for more of a defensive sort of minded lineup. You could play both together. And you could hopefully find someone else who could come in as a more of a shooting type option who could play alongside White. Or, what you'd want Pritchard to be, which you probably don't necessarily have in Pritchard. But I mean, you're finding different combinations that work there. I just think you have a couple of problems roster construction wise on this team right now. I do think having two elite wings as your two best players all negates part of one when they're both on the floor. Where I do think from a roster perspective, you'd be better off if you had an elite person at one position and an elite person at a different position. That's just one thing. So I think there's a little offset there between the Jays. Just, how many times do you see it's your turn, my turn? It just defaults into that sometimes because those are the types of players that they are. I think you have the same redundancy, obviously, with Smart and White. And that's a bit of a problem because it doesn't allow you to play different types of lineups. It allows you to do the same thing. But the
So
problem is
this is yeah.
you have a real tough time generating offense. So you don't have that like turbo button you can press when you want to kind of get. So Ime's trying and mixing and matching and trying to find different lineups. And really at the end of the day, it's I just need Tatum and or Brown on the floor at almost all times if I want to have an offensive lineup out there. And that's limiting because it puts such a heavy strain on those guys.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about this real point guard conversation, which I hate, but after what happened, I'm willing to have. I don't think there's a guy out there that
There
will
isn't.
have the
That's the
ball
problem.
and
There isn't.
be solving that problem 40 minutes a night. The ball is going to be in Tatum's hands. That's the whole point of this is that you want the ball in his hands a lot
So I
for him to
don't
be able
want
to
it in
do a
his
lot
hands
with
a
it.
lot. I don't. I don't. I don't like the offense when the ball is in Tatum's hands all the time. I really don't. I really do think you need that's the problem. And
On
this
this
is
team, I get why, but if you have enough spacing, and that's where I was going with this, you need to be able to generate better spacing with this team. And we saw them at their best when Grant was that guy. That obviously died in the finals. If you can add some layers of spacing on this team where if they load up against Tatum, I think you're going to be a much more dynamic offense because that guy, whoever it is going to be shooting wide open shots. It's just, as you said, it's Smart and White out there in crunch time taking those shots. Or
yeah,
it's Grant now who are a little unsteady in that spot, taking big shots at the end of games. So can you find a guy? And they've been looking for this since Ray Allen. It feels like that now that Neesmith's flopped and other guys haven't worked in that spot. That wing shooter, Grant did a great job with it this year, but I don't think he can handle it alone and log 30, 35 minutes a night across a bunch of different lineups playing that role. You need multiple guys that can do it, I think, and you need to be able to play versatilely. So my
yeah.
biggest my biggest thing that they need going into this offseason is a third wing. They got to find a guy that can allow them to play three wings out there and be more versatile offensively while still playing the defensive system that they want to.
Yeah.
Not as much double big next year, not as much Grant and Al, Grant and Rob. If Grant's still more of a big, I look at him than a wing guy, even though his defense got much better this year. I want that third wing, and
Yeah.
I think that's attainable.
Without knowing who these people are, things that I would do differently next year is go away from double big, and
You have
uh,
to, for Al's sake.
for Al's sake. But the second thing I would do is I would stagger Tatum. I know Tatum and Brown are going to overlap quite a bit because they're your two best players. You're not going to play them 24 minutes each, but I would stagger their minutes more and try to surround them with shooters.
That's what Ime wanted to do. Remember, he was talking about that earlier in the
Yeah.
year. He was like, "We want these guys to play together, but we're gonna, play them across different lineups too."
I would like to see them staggered more, where it's no doubt that you're the guy out there, but also when defenses draw, you have to be able to make the defenses pay when they over when they sell out to stop those guys, and they can't and they don't. And this is where I think there's a bit of a problem is because those guys aren't necessarily playing off one another. It doesn't matter when they're both out there at the same time. Only one guy's got the ball in his hands, and the defense is just watching that guy, and that's about it. And then they can leave almost everybody else open except for the other guy. So I mean, there's just not. It doesn't really help you the way that the roster is constructed right now. The burden is really heavy on those guys, and I don't want the ball in their hands a lot. They should not be making plays, and the reason they're making so many plays, or the reason they're asked to make so many plays, is I think you have to look at the way Ime handled things this year and think they're not just doing whatever they want out there. He does not want the ball in Smart's hands that much. So I really question whether or not Ime believes truly that Marcus Smart is the guy for this team. I think he recognizes he's the best guy he's got, but I don't think. I mean, he's not the guy with the ball in his hands in crunch time.
No, because again, I think they want to run an offense that loads up against the pressure that Tatum and Brown draw, and then get the ball out and create all the movement from there. And that's when we saw them at their best. And they certainly reached a level this year where they were assisting on like 70% of their shots during the postseason and made magic happen. You can show a bunch of different plays through that run where the ball is just whipping all over the place. I think it's underrated the progress that they made in terms of running that kind of offense. Now, did that lead into turnovers at times? Were there times where they just need to take more advantage of their shooting, particularly in the
But
finals there when the turnovers were on rampant?
I don't understand wanting to play with pace and also wanting to run the offense through Tatum. Unless Tatum gets a lobotomy, or unless Tatum, somebody just friggin' just shoots him up with energy drinks prior to the game, you're going to get what you're going to get, which is walking the ball up the court and or getting the ball in the half court and then just stopping and settling it down. And it's just not. I know you might want one thing, but you're not getting that thing if you're running the offense through Tatum.
Yeah, it's difficult, and he improved at it through courses of the year. Probably went back the other way later in the playoffs. But again, how are you gonna change the identity of this team when it's Tatum's team and he's gonna have the ball in his hands a lot? I think there's probably some ways to counteract that mildly, but one thing, if we're looking at all the options here this off season, I don't think there's anything you can do unless you really want to dream big with the Bradley Beal thing, which we've talked about for a year and a half now, that changes the identity of this team.